Let's talk about 10 players who are going to go off in week 13 of fantasy football. Before we jump into it, I want to show my thanks, my appreciation for each and every one of you guys. Super thankful for everyone who's been so supportive to me, to this channel. It means a lot. I want to give back. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give away $100. All you have to do is comment down below anything. It can be a question. It can be whatever. That's how you enter. Let's start with my bold call of the week, and it's Devin Neal. We know Alvin Kamara is going to be out this week for the Saints, and Neal was pretty productive last week. Once Kamara got hurt, he had 5 receptions for 43 yards on 7 targets. You love to see that. He didn't do a ton on the ground, 7 carries, 18 yards, 2.6 yards per carry, but he still finished with 11.1 fantasy points. You'll take that, and played 57 of the 66 running back snaps. The Saints could also be down their best pass catcher in Chris Olave, who's dealing with back spasms. My guess is Olave does probably play in this one, but if he doesn't, then Neal is going to see a ton of volume, not only on the ground, but through the air as well, which we love if you are in a PPR league. But regardless, Devin is a very talented player who was ultra productive in college at Kansas. 2023, over 1,400 total yards, 17 touchdowns. 2024, over 1,500 total yards and 17 touchdowns again. While Neal is in the bold call section of the video for a reason, I do think he's going to come through for you if you do end up starting him in week 13, just on sheer volume alone. He's going to see a ton of work, especially in the receiving game, if I had to guess. And the matchup against the Miami Dolphins is pretty favorable. They have been better against the run as of late, but they've still allowed the 4th most rushing yards to running backs this season, along with the 10th most fantasy points to the position. And a running back has scored at least 12.7 PPR points in 2 of the past 3 games when facing off against the Dolphins. I do think Taysom Hill is probably a little annoying in this one. He could steal away a goal line touchdown, but I still think Neal is going to see the majority of the touches out of the Saints backfield, and I do think he produces 15 plus fantasy points in this one. All right, moving on to our next guy, Jaylen Waddle, who, he let you down in a smash spot against the Commanders in week 11 before their bye. 3 catches, 52 yards, 7 targets, 8.2 fantasy points. You obviously were hoping for a lot more, but I think we can forgive the explosive receiver who's had plenty of big games this year, operating as the Dolphins' alpha dog, wide receiver 1, with Tyreek Hill out. And in Jaylen's last 7 games, he's the wide receiver 11, averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game, and has been getting fed the football through the air as of late. Week 11, he had a 33% target share. Week 12, 35% target share, 43% of the team's air yards on the season, along with 2.63 yards per route run, which is the 6th most among receivers. I am expecting the insane volume to continue for Jaylen Waddle, and it looks like Darren Waller could potentially return this week, which I only think is a good thing, is a benefit for Waddle. Take away some of that defensive attention, put it on Darren Waller, and I think that could put Jaylen in some nice matchups this week. I think that Waddle is going to eat regardless, though, in a plus matchup against the Saints, who are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to receivers this season, along with the 2nd most fantasy points to perimeter receivers over the last 4 weeks. So, Waddle burned you a couple weeks ago. They're coming out of their bye. He's well rested. He's feeling good. I do think he puts together a monster performance in week 13. All right, moving on to our next guy, R.J. Harvey, another guy who let you down in week 11, but it was a pretty tough matchup, as we know, against a stingy Kansas City Chiefs run defense. You were hoping, though, obviously, for a bigger game from Harvey, considering J.K. Dobbins is out for the season. He was not active in this one, but Harvey didn't really do a ton. 11 carries, 30 yards, 2.7 yards per carry, 3 receptions, 20 yards on 3 targets. You like the involvement in the passing game. You like to see a lot more, though, on the ground and through the air. Only 8 fantasy points. The production overall was minimal, but I think you can hang your hat on the usage. It was pretty promising, as he saw 61% of the snaps, which was a season high, 61% of the rush attempts, 48% of the routes run, 11 of the 17 running back carries. He led the Broncos backfield in routes and targets, 3 red zone attempts. Like Harvey is seeing these high value touches on a good Broncos offense behind an elite offensive line. I think better, bigger days are coming for the rookie. He should be well rested, much more integrated in this Sean Payton playbook as the Broncos are also coming out of a bye week. And the matchup in week 13 is very juicy against the Washington Commanders, who are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season, along with 5.3 yards per carry since week 8. I think you can start Harvey with a ton of confidence this week in what I think is going to be a smash spot. All right, moving on to our next guy, Stefon Diggs, who's kind of been all over the place from a usage standpoint, from a fantasy production standpoint. He was held in check against the Bengals last week in what looked like to be a really good spot for him. 2 catches, 20 yards on 3 targets, 4 fantasy points. Not great overall, but a lot of that had to deal with the Patriots featuring the tight end position, as it was a glaring weakness of this Bengals defense. So I think this was more of a scheme, more of a game plan issue than Diggs just having a bad game, because prior to week 12, Diggs had either a touchdown or 100 receiving yards in 4 straight games. You love to see that, along with 11 targets in week 11, 8 targets in week 10. I think Diggs is going to bounce back on Monday Night Football against the Giants, who have been shredded by opposing receivers all year long, as they've allowed the 2nd most yards and 5th most fantasy points to the position this season. I'd be getting Diggs in your starting lineup. I think you can expect a big-time performance from him, and it just always feels like Stefon goes off on primetime games. It's what he does. He shines under the lights, and I think it's going to be one of those games where he goes for over 100 yards and scores a touchdown in week 13. All right, moving on to our next guy, Travis Etienne. Well, it's not looking great for us Bayshul Tune owners at this point, unfortunately, as Etienne appears to be the guy in this Jacksonville backfield moving forward, as he saw his 2nd highest snap share of the season last week at 64%. I was wrong. I take the L. I thought that was going to be a big Tootin game. It didn't happen. I do apologize if that significantly hurt anyone or they lost their lineup because of that. I feel awful about it. I've been beating myself up over it, but you just have to accept it. It's the ETN show at this point. 60% of the rush attempts last week, 46% of the routes run, and he put together a great game. He had like a great game like 2 minutes into the game. I was like, you got to be kidding me. He had like 60 yards and a touchdown like right away. Good for him, though. He finished with 15 carries, 86 yards, 5.7 yards per carry, 3 catches, 30 yards, and 4 targets, 20.6 fantasy points. And over ETN's last 4 games, he has been cooking 19-plus opportunities in every contest, 5 total touchdowns, RB7, averaging 18 fantasy points per game. Like, Travis has reached must-start territory at this point, and I think he's going to go off again this week against the Titans, who have allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season, along with the 2nd most touchdowns allowed to the position. So, yeah, plug ETN into your lineup. Feel really good about it. All right, moving on to our next guy, Ladd McConkey, who is another guy who's coming off one of his worst games of the season in week 11 against the Jaguars. 3 receptions, 13 yards, 4 targets, 4.3 fantasy points. But to be fair, this Chargers offense, everyone on this Chargers offense struggled in this one. Here's what we know. Ladd is the Chargers alpha wide receiver 1, unquestioned wide receiver 1 at this point. As Keenan Allen, 33 years old, is finally starting to show his age. It's clear he doesn't have a lot left in the tank, and Quentin Johnston has cooled off drastically as he's laid a goose egg in 2 out of his last 4 games. He's kind of a boom or bust receiver at this point. It's going to be the McConkey show moving forward as he leads the Chargers in targets per game at 8 over his last 7 games and is the wide receiver 9 in fantasy since week 7, averaging 17.5 PPR points per game. This is what Ladd does. This is what we saw from him his rookie year. He gets hot the second half of the season. He's looking like a guy who's going to continue to ball out for the Chargers and should have no problem this week against the Las Vegas Raiders secondary that's allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to receivers this season. I'd be starting Ladd, who's primed for a monster bounce back game. All right, moving on to our next guy, Kenneth Walker. Things are starting to trend up for the ultra talented back as this Seahawks coaching staff is finally realizing that he's just a much better player at the running back position, and he saw a season high 64% of the snaps in week 12. Turn that into a solid game. 11 carries, 71 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, 3 receptions, 30 yards, 13.1 fantasy points, and has been more involved in the pass game as of late, which you love to see. 6 receptions, 74 yards on 7 targets over his last 2 games, and has outcarried Zach Charbonnet 27-17 since week 11. And yes, Charbonnet continues to score touchdowns when they get in close. It just happens every single week. Walker did receive a goal line carry, though, in this one. He didn't convert it, but the fact that he got the opportunity is notable, is important, and Walker has seen 13 plus opportunities in 5 straight games and needs to be in starting lineups. It's scary. You don't really know what kind of Walker you're going to get that week. You don't know if Seattle's just going to go all in on Charbonnet, but the trend is, like I said, it's pointing up for Walker. I'd be surprised if they kind of go back to featuring Charbonnet. It's going to be the Walker show, in my opinion, and I think he's due for one of those big blow-up performances, 2 touchdowns, over 100 yards, and I think we get something similar to that, maybe not to that extreme. But the Minnesota Vikings have not been great, as they've been gashed on the ground, giving up 140 or more yards in 4 out of their last 5 games, so start Walker, put him in your lineup, and I truly do think he has a big game. All right, moving on to our next guy, Khalil Shakir, who went off in week 12. It was super nice to see against the Texans. 8 receptions, 110 yards on 10 targets, 17 fantasy points, 31% target share, and was Josh Allen's top target in the passing game all afternoon. Shakir has seen 8+ targets in 3 of his last 4 games and figures to be the focal point of this Bills passing attack yet again, especially if Dalton Kincaid, tight end who's dealing with a hamstring injury, is out again. And Vegas has this game against the Steelers as one of the higher totals on the slate. Aaron Rodgers, we know, is going to be active in this one. This is another big Shakir, probably another big James Cook game as well. But through the air, the Steelers have allowed the most fantasy points per game to receivers this season and have had trouble defending slot receivers all year long. I think Shakir is going to go off in this one. I know it kind of feels weird. I get it. Like starting Shakir, you don't know what you're going to get. He's going to give you 5 points or he's going to give you 17+ points, right? So it is I am a little cautious here. I do think he has a nice game, but as long as they utilize him in the passing game, the matchup is amazing. I do think he can go off, but if you're debating between 2 guys, drop it down in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer it. All right, moving on to our next guy, TreVeyon Henderson, whose hot streak came to a screeching halt, unfortunately, last week. 18 carries, 66 yards, 3.7 yards per carry, 3 receptions, 15 yards, 11.1 fantasy points. Obviously, after how hot he's been as of late, you probably were hoping for a bigger day. But the positive, the biggest takeaway here is that Henderson held that starting role over Ramondre Stevenson, who returned last week as he was coming off that foot injury. And yeah, I mean, Ramondre Stevenson's role could increase the upcoming weeks as they kind of ease him back in. But my guess is that TreVeyon remains the RB1 for the Patriots. He deserves it. He's clearly the best back on the roster. He saw a 65% snap share last week, outcarried Stevenson 18-6, 19 routes out of the backfield, 4 targets. He did lose out on some goal line work to Stevenson and Jennings, but neither back was able to score a touchdown. So I don't know, maybe next week, give all those opportunities to Henderson, and I bet he scores. I think he's going to be the feature guy in this backfield for the Patriots moving forward. And if his strong usage does stick, which I'm predicting it does, Henderson could have an absolute field day on Monday Night Football against the Giants, who have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to running backs and have given up the most rushing yards and touchdowns to running backs since week 8. The Patriots should also have full command of this game, I'm guessing. I know Jackson Dart is back, but I do still think that New England is dominating this game, which means they could lean on the running attack and lean on Henderson. I would be starting the rookie, even coming off a down performance, and expect him to carry you to a victory on Monday Night Football. All right, moving on to our next guy, Troy Franklin. Start all your Broncos receivers this week. I do think Franklin leads the way, who has looked like the Broncos wide receiver 1 as of late, as he's earned more targets than Sutton in 6 straight games. and he's been having a really strong sophomore campaign. Franklin, that is, 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games and has scored at least 12.4 PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games. Bo Nix and Franklin continue to show their strong chemistry and rapport. We know they were college teammates at Oregon, so that obviously helps. I do think Troy is going to have another big game. I do think he's going to eat this week, whether he's lined up outside, inside. It doesn't matter against the Commanders, who have one of the worst secondaries in football this year. And they're also down, as we know, their top corner in Marshawn Lattimore, who hasn't even played that good this season. But Franklin has shown us already this year that he can explode in easy matchups, as he did it in week 8 against the Cowboys. He had 6 receptions, 89 yards, and 2 touchdowns, 26.9 fantasy points. I do think he comes through for you with another big performance in week 13, as the Commanders have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to receivers this season, along with 101 yards per game, 2 slot receivers. Expect Franklin to smash in this one. That's all I have for you guys today. Again, remember, if you want to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is comment anything down below and you'll be eligible to win $100. I'll pick the winner in the next couple of days, but more importantly, it's not about the money. It's about how much I appreciate each and every one of you literally all season long. This has only been my 2nd year creating fantasy football content on YouTube, and I cannot thank you guys enough. You guys have been great. You guys have made this so fun for me, and I'm just super excited to close out the year really strong. Again, appreciate you all. You guys are seriously the best, and I'll see you in the next one.